I know that there are so many others just like me. You may be one of us. We are broken, torn, frayed, holes in us, parts of us knocked over or torn apart. Maybe we weren't put together right at our beginnings. Those who put us together were probably broken themselves. And often we are attacked or seduced and coerced by others who are broken in such a way that they need to break others and feed on the destruction. This has been going on for quite a while. I have been confused by all of this for most of my life. Most often, I believed what I was told by so many in my family, and then those that pretended to love me, or those who pretended to be trustworthy and credible persons of authority. I believed what was said to me when I was in distress and suffering. I believed what those who would hurt me would always say, that it was me that was the problem. That there was something that I was doing or not doing, or something that I was being or not being, which made it my fault that I was suffering, my fault that they hurt me, or worse, that it was all in my head. No, I was told that didn't happen. Clearly, I must be crazy. I have a feeling that there are others here that know what this feels like, even as a child, to look at the adults and think, do these people have the faintest clue what they are doing? How can everyone be so wrong? It has to be me. There must be something very wrong with me to think that all of this is just so very unfair. It doesn't feel right, but so many people tell me that I am wrong. It has to be me that is wrong.
Storms, they come, they go. They know to ride the breeze. Life is not always still.
And I didn't want to be wrong, so I had to fix myself. Each time I ran into a situation where I had this feeling of injustice, or just plain wrong, I would try to make sense of it by studying. This is my response when I don't understand. I can't act without understanding, and I must study to be able to decide how to act. I was a very bookish child, very shy and withdrawn. I trusted few people. And I was often burned if I tried to trust someone new. But if it was in writing, I could trust that the next time I read it, it would at least say the same thing. Books were consistent and reliable, whereas most people were not. Over time, I turned more and more to books or other credible sources, particularly those that were widely considered to be experts in an attempt to make sense of the world. Because I didn't trust or believe the people around me, I could see from how they lived their lives that they actually didn't have a clue. So I've spent a lot of time over the decades of my life studying all aspects of humans and how we interact with each other and within ourselves. And over time and space, in history and herstory, in groups, as individuals, within intimate relationships, and within larger classes, and then one class to another class of people. I was trying to make sense of what appeared to be chaos, of what was happening to me and around me, trying to understand the patterns. I went down some wrong turns. I became convinced of things that turned out to be wrong. Now, if I had closed my mind and refused to consider that I might be wrong, I could never have learned better. Always, I turned to my own experience in the world to test these theories, or opinions, or perspectives. I was more easily led astray when I was younger. I had less experience, and so I had less evidence that I had gathered my own self. And the more evidence that I gathered, and the more that I studied, the more that I could compare anything new to the patterns that I had already observed and to what I had learned about. And the older that I have become, the greater trust I have learned to put in my own perceptions so that I can now more easily reject things as being wrong, and particularly if they are about me. I have learned, partly because my last therapist told me before he kicked me out of therapy for being unaccountably completely sane, that I am not crazy. But I have discovered, though I do not currently have an official diagnosis, that I am almost certainly on the autistic spectrum. And those of us that are called high functioning, for lack of a better term, often have an area of special interest that they focus on. This then has been my area. All I have ever wanted from very early childhood was to be nestled into the supportive peacefulness of a loving family and community. I needed this. We all do. I did not ever get it. And I suspect that many of those of you listening to me right now also did not ever get it. But now that I understand why I did not ever get that, and that it was not just me, I am able to finally start that journey of making that home. So, it wasn't just me. I was not what was wrong. And it wasn't just me. I was not alone. But still, I must start with myself. I must work to foster health within myself, in my body, in my mind, in my spirit. Although I was not what was wrong, still, I have been broken during my time here. Living in a way of life that was wrong. And so I must mend myself. And in healing, I begin to make that home. And I make that home within myself, for myself, within myself for others, and in that space together for all of us. I can and do devote myself to mending relationships with and supporting the health of all those who I love. And I can start to mend the web of connection of love and life that is community. This is what I mean by the phrase that you will all become familiar with as we take this journey together. All of us, as broken as we are, we can still and always make ourselves a home. Starting here on ReMatriate, we can become a community where we can foster and support each other in growing to health so that we can all make ourselves a home. Relationships are everything. Relationships with our own selves, relationships with those most close to us, relationships within our community, relationships with all the other sacred children of nature, the fur people, the fish people, the feather people, the rock people, the plant people, the tree people, the fungus people, the insect people, the soil people, the rivers, the lakes, the ponds, the seas, the meadows, the grasslands, the forests, the gardens, all our relations. To make a home, you must first weave anew the web of relationship between all people. This is why I am speaking to you now, and why I will be continuing to speak to you on this channel, because we are all on that same journey of mending the tears in the fabric of life, mending our relationship with our own selves and all other people in our web, including all the people who are not human, mending our cosmology, mending our way of life. Each of us as individuals can take this journey, and our entire culture needs to take this journey as well. I have learned that our culture, this global civilization that very nearly all of us who are alive on Earth right now were raised in, is neither healthy nor natural, neither just nor sustainable. And so this culture does not function in any way that is natural, physiologically normal that is, or natural or healthy. None of us here were raised right. None of us put together right from our beginnings, because none of our forebears were raised right. Once upon a time, we all lived in matriarchal cultures that were completely enmeshed in reciprocal, collaborative, sustainable relationship life webs. But then something terrible happened. Going back between 4,000 and 10,000 years, depending on your location, each indigenous matriarchal culture was invaded and colonized and exploited and dismantled and cannibalized and enslaved and infected and brainwashed and destroyed by patriarchal civilized agriculture and mining war-making forces. Since that time, we have all been raised in patriarchal exploiter cultures, and we are all living with the consequences of generation after generation being raised in this culture for 4,000 to 10,000 years. This is why it wasn't me that was wrong, and why it wasn't you that was wrong, but rather something much bigger than any of us for more than 4,000 years. That sounds like a long time, but it's really just an eye blink within the longer time that we humans have been living on this planet. We have been fully modern humans for several 100,000 years. The earlier hominids, such as Neanderthals, are now known to have been completely intelligent and capable as well, for probably more than 1 million years. So that even longer time should be added to our understanding of how long we have been living with Mother Nature on this planet, this Mother Earth, Gaia, Danu, Mother Goddess. For most of that time that we have been here, we lived in that sacred web of care, where our Mother Nature provided everything that we needed. All her children had reciprocal relationships with all her other children, each of us giving and enhancing our home, our web of life, each of us having all our needs met through that web, through everything given by all our relations. This is how we lived in that intact web in our matriarchal cultures, because we were all raised in matriarchal cultures. We were all raised in the patterns of child rearing practiced by matriarchal cultures. In order to mend ourselves and make ourselves a home, we need to understand how we lived when we lived this way, starting with how children were and still are in the few matriarchal cultures that continue to exist, raised in healthy and natural ways. To heal from what was wrong, from what broke us, we need to understand how it should be done. We need to understand how to do it right. There is a great deal of commonality in the ways that children are raised in healthy cultures. Darcia Narvaez has studied these patterns of care and what children need, and has come up with a name for this model. She calls it the evolved nest. This is the way to do it right. It took me a long time to find this. I developed my interest in child rearing practices more than 35 years ago, back when I was still an adolescent myself. I knew I wasn't being raised right, and I wanted to know how it should be done correctly. I wanted to do a better job for my future children than my parents had been able to do for me. Over much time, and through the rearing of my children, I have discovered that a model called attachment parenting represents the best description of the right way to raise children. I myself prefer the term natural mothering, but this is a less widely known term. As I have learned more and better, I have tried to put this knowledge into practice. I was also wrestling with my own past and the way that I wasn't raised right by people who hadn't been raised right, by people who hadn't been raised right. I discovered Narvaez's work only a few years ago, It's the most recent of the knowledge that I've gained. I learned this during my continuing studies into matriarchal cultures. I learned about and I met her on a Zoom conference on modern matriarchal studies, which was led by Genevieve Vaughn and also included Heide Abendroth. Now, I have been studying the work of both these women for more than 10 years. I attended a series of lectures done by Professor Gutner Abendroth in 2013, and I was able to purchase copies of 2 of her texts, which she signed for me, and I had much opportunity to speak personally with her as well. Learning about matriarchal cultures came about for me through my deeper study of radical feminism and also deep ecology. All of these follow on from what I learned while I was in university during the 1990s. I took a Bachelor of Arts, and although I began studying English, I switched my major after I discovered my great academic love, human geography. Human geography is the study of the interactions between human beings and the landscape. It is a social science rather than a physical science, and this is exactly what I have always loved. My area of special focus is, paradoxically, the big picture. So, how we live, how we interact, what we think, feel, and believe, how all of this creates our behavior and our decisions, our values. During my time in university, I was able to learn a lot more about the ways that different cultures in time and place live and have lived. So, adding on to what I had already started to learn in my own life about this culture. The specific details of how cosmology interact with land management, decision making, those kinds of things. In many ways, human geography is very much the twin sister of cultural anthropology, but with the focus on the land. And it meshes very well with feminist approaches because it assumes that the personal is political. When I was in university, the discipline of women's studies still existed. The anti-feminist backlash that calls itself the third wave was starting to erode feminism, but it hadn't yet completely triumphed. And so I was able to study feminist methodologies. And I resonated most with a particular methodology called participant observer. Quite simply, as a woman, I am a participant in living as a member of that group. And so by adding the component of observing to that lived experience of participating, I can start to notice patterns, which is basically what I've already been doing all of my life. But learning about this methodology gave me a name for how I functioned and what I was doing for the work of my life. Now, I have not been able, because of the way my life has played out, to engage in the work of my life for pay. I haven't been able to use my degree to support myself and my family, but I have always been engaged in this work. From childhood, before I knew what I was doing, to university, where I began to understand my work, and now 25 some odd years later, after living so much more direct experience of the wrongness and, yes, the evil of this civilization. There's really nothing like learning a thing through living a thing, if you manage to survive it. And this is another thing I've learned that I suspect many of you will share with me. Something that I have had to survive. A way that I was broken. That many of you may have also been broken. This is becoming more and more common as our culture intensifies, because our culture fosters the creation of this kind of evil. I fell in love with and married a narcissist. And he has spent the 20 some odd years since we met destroying me and my loved ones and my children. And yes, I've managed to survive it. For most of these years, I didn't understand what was occurring. I had already had an abusive marriage, but this is something on a whole other level. Something that took all of myself and everything I had to figure out. After much research, I have discovered that there are names for what I have been through and for the pathology that created these situations. I am very far from alone in this. I had to spend a lot of time studying psychology, but I now know that the correct term for my ex-husband is a covert, malignant narcissist. Now, if any of you are at all familiar with any of these terms, I am sure you can begin to imagine the kind of destruction that such a cruel and sadistic person can unleash upon you. The worst thing that he did, and the last thing that he did, was to take my children from me and keep them from me for more than 9 years. I never got them back. It is only as they are aging and becoming adults that they are either escaping or being discarded by him. This is an extremely common phenomenon. Most men regularly take children from their mothers. If the mother tries to protect her children from him, and the system actually supports him in this. It's very shocking to realize that this happens. If it hadn't happened to me, I would never have believed it. But since I go by studying, I studied and discovered that this happens so often that Lundy Bancroft, who is the world's expert on abusers, has created a term for it. He calls it protective mother syndrome. He has even created an organization for those of us suffering this called the Protective Mothers Alliance. Now, this phenomenon is also called domestic violence by proxy. Basically, if a man can't hurt his woman any longer, then he can hurt her children. And is there anything that hurts a woman more than to hurt her children? It was only when I began to understand that this was actually not just something that had happened to me, that it was a phenomenon that was occurring more commonly, and that I was able to name it and locate it within my ex-husband, who I call Father Demon, his pathology as a covert malignant narcissist, that I was capable of even beginning to survive it. If there are other mothers of loss here listening, you know when your children are taken and you know that they're suffering, it kills you. So I died, but I'm still walking. I was capable of surviving it because I knew what was happening. You have no idea how immense of a relief it is to be able to say that you know what is happening to you. Unless, like me, you've had this experience. And I do believe that many of you watching have had this same experience. But naming what was done to you is not everything, but it's a start. And yes, being able to understand and name what you are experiencing and being able to locate yourself and your experiences within the bigger picture is an absolutely foundational part of the healing process. For me, I must also be able to help others as part of my own healing process. First, of course, I must heal my own children from what their father demon has done to them, for what living in this evil culture has done to all of us, but not just my own children. I have been blessed to heal my current partner, who has had his own struggles, and it is only through healing him and myself, and him healing himself and me, that either of us has a home in each other. This is how it works. I believe that this is why I feel a deep call to heal others. We each begin our own process of healing as individuals, but healing as individuals is an absolutely foundational part of the process of healing our relationships with others. And it is through healing all our relationships that we begin the foundational work of healing our whole world. It is what each of us must do, and we must do together so that we can make ourselves a home. So, I'm going to be sharing what I have learned here, and also what work I am doing to make that home. A lot of work to do. And much of it is actually physical work. I'm only just beginning to rescue and heal my children after more than 9 years of their being held captive by Father Demon. So 2 are out, but 2 are still under his control, and my eldest daughter is utterly broken by what Father Demon did to her, and because I wasn't able to protect or save her. He didn't take her captive, but she must heal before she can be truly free from him. Yes, there is much work to do. I do finally have some stability in my life, in terms of having a place to live, and people in my life who I can depend on, who are not evil, but I do not have a building that can be a home for me and my children. So even though I now have some contact with them, I can't bring them home to me. This causes me much pain, but I do have a plan. I share a piece of land with a tiny old farmhouse on it with my partner, my Papa Bear. Yes, I'm MamaCass Bear, and he is my Papa Bear. Our home is far out in the Canadian wilderness, so I'm going to call that place Wildernest. And on that piece of land, I will be building home for my cubs and myself. This home will be off-grid in all the ways that a home can be off-grid. A place to put everything that I have been learning for my whole life into practice. Principles of permaculture, of deep ecology, of sustainably living in place in good physical health, mental health, spiritual health, and where I can live out the values of my faith as a pagan, as a goddess worshiper. We can live our reweaving of relationships between each other and with our land. A return to mother. My children each returning home to me, their mother. And also all of us together reweaving a matriarchal culture. A culture based on mother-centered values, as Heidegger Abendroth so eloquently puts it. I've spent a lot of time learning about natural building techniques and practices and traditional indigenous architecture, although a lot of it at a more academic level from a social science perspective, but not entirely. I have on many occasions gotten my hands dirty, but I haven't had as much opportunity to learn these things because as a girl and a woman, I was simply not afforded these opportunities. In fact, I was often actively denied the option in my family as a child. Because I was a girl, I was not allowed to learn these things. But I have since worked to learn as much as I can, when and as I can. And my Papa Bear has a background in construction, so he knows rather a lot about building. I am actively learning more specific details about individual building techniques where you build structures from materials gathered from the land rather than going and buying everything at a store in the city. Papa Bear, unfortunately, only knows this way of building. So we're going to learn these things together. He's going to learn a different way, and I'm going to be learning this more specifically so that we can engage in the act of building to make that physical home for ourselves. So there will be many times when I am just, yes, as a woman, going to be doing these things entirely by myself, the hard way. Sometimes I just have to learn things that way. I have to get involved and figure it out. And my one daughter, who I call Sunny Cub, because she has an incredibly sunny disposition, has escaped from Father Demon completely. She's gone permanent, no contact, and we need to build a house for her first. And she has decided to be part of the process of building, so she will be helping and learning as well to make herself a home. And there are others who I will be referring to along the journey. And I'll also tell you the names that I've picked for everyone so that you will know who and what I'm talking about, but not everyone in one video. This is going to take time. This is going to be a long journey. My eldest son, who I call Man Cub, shares an apartment with me in a small city. This is where I am right now. It's about an hour's drive away from Wilderness. And this is because we both have full-time jobs here. There is no work anywhere close to Wilderness. And I don't drive, nor does Man Cub. Papa Bear drives, and he is retired early as he can no longer work for health reasons. And Papa picks me up and brings me home on the weekends. But during the work week, I stay here at City Den. And it's just a basement apartment. It's nothing fancy, but it's all we can afford. Rents doubled here during the pandemic, and neither of us makes a lot of money. Man Cub's just starting out, and because of the instability in my life, largely due to Father Demon, and also the fact that I have been at home raising children for a very large part of my life, I do not have the kind of earning power that comes with a successful career. So I work in a factory where we manufacture meat products. It's very hard physical labor in a refrigerated work environment. The pay is not terrible. It's respectable, but given the amount of expenses that I have, it barely gives me enough to get by. Making enough to get ahead or even possibly get free to escape, damn near impossible. So that's life for us working class folks, right? One of the parts of the big picture that I have figured out and pieced together from wisdom that I've learned from others is that working class people are held captive by this civilization through having to work so hard just to survive. We don't have much time to think our own thoughts, to figure out what is going on, to contemplate whether there might be an alternative. Particularly when you do hard physical labor for a living, you are so tired at the end of the day that just getting enough rest to be able to get up the next morning and do it all over again is really all you can manage. I am far from alone in living this experience. I suspect that a lot of you watching here have the same experience. Many of you have also been broken in this way. Maybe you have this gut feeling that you want to get off this treadmill. Maybe you want to get out of the rat race, off the grid. That you don't want to work so hard to pay the rent on a crappy place that you live in. That what you really want is to make yourself a home. I see huge amounts of people making videos about this, and even huger groups of people watching those videos, all about living in a different way, in many different ways. The big terminology, though, is definitely off-grid. And I think many of you are here for that reason. And yes, you are in the right place. Perhaps more than you might even know, because we're not just talking about getting off the power and sewer and water grid. We're talking about getting our minds off the grid, out from under the grid. I'm going to talk about the big picture, but I'm also going to talk about specific real world ways of starting to make those changes, about how to heal ourselves as individuals, about how to heal others and relationships in our world. I'm going to talk about the work of building new ways of living, about things that I already know and already do, and also things that I'm still learning and you can learn along with me, even as women. Yes, we can learn how to do all of these things, no matter who tells us we can't. We're going to learn, and I do know rather a lot about many of these things already, and I'm just going to give you a great big long laundry list of the kinds of things I'm going to be talking about. Permaculture, regenerative agriculture, holistic management, natural buildings such as timber frame, cob, straw bale, cordwood log, reciprocal roofs, living roofs, biogas digesters, vermicomposting and water cycling, passive solar design, rocket mass heaters, sustainable forests and silvopasturing, chicken, pig, and goat tractors, earthships, nomadic pastoralist lifestyles and homes, evolved nest and natural mothering, child-rearing practices, and the practice of nonviolent communication, healing from narcissistic abuse, breaking identification with civilization and decolonizing our minds, spiritual practices such as dispelling Wedico, marking festivals on the pagan wheel of the year, embarking on what Joseph Campbell calls the hero's journey, discovering immanent deity within the natural world rather than transcending it, outside it, or what Michael Dowd likes to call eco-theo-spirituality. Truly nourishing food, and how the Paleolithic diet heals us from diseases of civilization. Clothing and fiber arts that are made from natural and or upcycled materials, and that fit actual human bodies. Not what fashion says we should be, but what we actually are, and fits actual human lives, things that you can wear while you're actually living. And expressing your personality, your beauty as art, rather than the dictates of fashion. You express yourself, not what some designer in some faraway place tells you is what makes you acceptable. Making as many of the things that we use in daily life with our own hands, so that the art of living the act of living becomes an art, a spiritual practice of gratitude for all that we are blessed with, taking things that others see as garbage and turning that into raw materials, using skill and creativity and patient work to create beauty, to craft beauty. All of this is about making and doing things by hand, with materials and systems, knowledge gained from nature, making our homes, food, clothing, and everything we need and love in our lives by our own hands. Creating a life made by hand. We are becoming radical homemakers. It has taken me a long time to get here. I'm 51 years old. And I struggle with how late in life I am finally coming to what is actually a beginning. And I beat myself up, and I know that I'm not alone in this. I like to think that it's simply that the research phase of my life has been long. But I have been blessed by my mother goddess to have had the wisdom of others in my path as I have traveled and struggled and learned. There is only one thing in this world that gives me greater joy than learning these things and seeing how each new piece of the puzzle slides into the pattern to make that greater and more complex, more beautiful whole. And that is sharing it. So here we are. And you've been so kind as to watch this video. By watching, you become a part of this community, and you begin, or more likely, since you've watched to the end, continue on your own journey of returning to Mother here at ReMatriate. And I want to welcome you, as we say in the pagan community, hail and well met. Now, I'm going to regularly provide links to all kinds of terrific resources. I've learned a lot over the years, and as I said, I want to share that. So I'll be talking about books that I have read, books that I have just acquired and I'm reading. I will probably talk about specific things within those books. Some of them are, the books that I'm acquiring right now are very specific techniques of natural building and things like that. And I will also provide links in each video that will be more specific to that video. For this one, I'm going to drop a couple of links below. The single best resource right now on narcissism in order to understand all of it in a way that is relatively easy to learn, is Dr. Ramani. I'll put a link to her YouTube channel below in the description for the video. And in future videos, I will give you a description of what a covert malignant narcissist is, so that you have a better idea of what myself and my children are dealing with in terms of what we're having to escape from. I will also talk to you about things like Radical culture and how narcissism is one expression of that. I'm also going to give a description of protective mother syndrome. Protective mother syndrome doesn't just happen when the father is a narcissist. That is one of the pathologies, but it's a wonderful term that was coined by Lundy Bancroft, and I think that it's better. He's the world's expert on domestic violence and on abusers, but domestic violence by proxy doesn't explain it quite as well for me. So I like that term, protective mother syndrome. Because I'm certain that many of you have also suffered from this, and you are members of the sisterhood of the mothers of loss, which is what I call those of us who have, in one way or another, lost our children. And in this culture, in this patriarchal culture, there's a lot of us that belong to the sisterhood of the mothers of loss. So I will be dropping a link about that in the description for this video. Now, there are many components of healing that we will all have to work through to do this mending. I want all of you to have the benefit of the knowledge that I have gathered. My suffering only has meaning if others can benefit. A large part of that will be talking about my own journey of healing. I will describe what broke me and what I am doing to put myself back together again, in my mind, in my body, and in my spirit. I am not finished. I am not defeated. It wasn't me that was wrong. It wasn't my children that were wrong. It wasn't you that was wrong. What was done to us was wrong. The culture, the civilization that we live in, that raised us up wrong, that put us together from our beginnings wrong, that didn't give us what we needed and held us in captivity, in indentured servitude, brainwashed and ignorant. That is what was and what is wrong. We can escape. We don't have to remain as captives. We can free our minds and the rest will follow. Get off this treadmill and out of this rat race, out from under and then off this grid. And we will all here together make ourselves home.
Storms they come, they go. is cold.